The Cartoonerific podcast is sponsored by the Wonderful World of Animation Gallery, home of rare and wonderful fine animation art. Visit their website at wwagallery.com. And for our Cartoonerific listeners, you will receive a special 10% discount off any purchase if you purchase by March 25th, 2024. Just go to wwagallery.com and enter code CARTOON10 for your 10% discount. Once again, this discount is only valid until midnight, March 25th, 2024. Once again, visit wwagallery.com.
The following is a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
It's Cartoonerific. Cartoonerific. It's Cartoonerific. With your host Brian Mitchell.
Well, welcome. This is Brian Mitchell, and you are listening to the Cartoonerific podcast, Classic Animated Cartoons, and I'm your host. That's what I am. Anyway, today we have a special show. You know, when you think about classic animated cartoons, you probably don't think about the studio that we're going to be talking about today. When I think of classic animation, I think of Disney and Warner Brothers cartoons and MGM cartoons and Lance cartoon, all at Fleischer. I think of all that stuff. But we don't really put this studio into that category. But I have to say, they have done classic animated cartoons. They've done more than that. They've done stop motion as well. And this was a studio that existed in New York for many years. It's now gone. It's long gone. One of the creators has passed away a couple of years ago, and the other creator, I believe, is living in France, but we'll find out for sure when we talk to our next guest. This studio produced some of the most famous animation ever, and it's not a major studio. It was never a major studio. It was a little studio that existed down in Manhattan, in New York City, but they produced some of the most charming animation, both live action and hand-drawn animation. And what's interesting is pretty much all the animation was farmed out. It wasn't produced here in the United States. It was farmed out to either Japan or Canada or England. They produced such famous TV specials, and some of you have already guessed it: Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, Frosty the Snowman. These shows have become basically perennials. They've been shown every year. They never seem to go away. And even shows like The Little Drummer Boy that they produced back in the 60s for NBC is still being played, or Nestor, the Long-Eared Donkey. I can't think of all the shows that they produced, all the Christmas specials that they produced, but one of the most famous ones, A Year Without a Santa Claus, or the Here Comes Peter Cottontail, with wonderful music and charming-looking characters, but it was produced either in stop motion or in cell animation, like I said, not here in the States. And even though Disney Animation or Warner Brothers Animation or MGM Animation is going to top it in terms of movement, this stuff had a charm all its own. And it's influenced a lot of people over the years. I mean, if you look at Elf with Will Ferrell, the opening animation is basically a homage to the Rankin Bass stop motion animation. Today we're talking about Rankin Bass. Our special guest is Mr. Rick Goldschmidt. He has authored a bunch of books. He is a historian at rankinbass.com, Rick is coming up next. Please stay tuned. It should be an interesting show. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are too. We'll be right back.
Cartoonerific is the place to be to celebrate hand-drawn animated cartoons. The Cartoonerific podcast features interviews with the magic makers behind your favorite animated cartoons, with episodes uploaded every Friday. Or visit the Cartoonerific blog featuring articles about classic cartoon animation. At the Cartoonerific Gallery, view original animation art and memorabilia from your favorite animated films and TV shows. The company store features exclusive swag from the Cartoonerific universe. And coming soon, brand new world premiere cartoons on the Cartoonerific channel. It's all here. Join the fun at www.cartoonerific.com. That's cartoon, ERIFIC.com. It's Cartoonerific, saving the universe one funny cartoon at a time. And now it's time for our special Cartoonerific guest.
Well, welcome back. We have a very special guest on today. This is a subject near and dear to my heart because I grew up on all this stuff. I said before, this is not classic animation in the term of, full animation or whatever. The animation was charming and it was very, very special. And the music on these shows and specials was wonderful. The writing was excellent, and the designs were very charming. And, it's not the smoothest of animation, but it really, I guess it's made a difference in a lot of people's lives. And a lot of those people are professionals that work in the business today. So, it says a lot. It says a real lot. And these specials have stood the test of time. So today we have the Rankin Bass guru, the historian for Rankin Bass Productions. He's written a number of books about these things, Mad Monster Party, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and the Enchanted World of Rankin Bass, a portfolio, which I believe is an expanded edition now. Please welcome Rick Goldschmidt. Hi, Rick. How you doing today?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me, Brian.
Hey, thank you for coming on. So, I this is something that I've... when I grew up, you would see Rankin Bass on these specials. I mean, I grew up on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I grew up on the Oz shorts, the little 5-minute shorts that they did early on, and Pinocchio and Mad Monster Party. I saw in a movie theater in Brooklyn. And yeah, so The Daydreamer, I saw all these feature films. But what really made an impression on me was the animated holiday specials. And I mean, it all made an impression on me.
Well, me too.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, even when they went on, they were doing bits and pieces of hand-drawn animation, and they were doing stop-motion animation. They just kept going and producing these specials that have just been rerun over and over and over again. They don't go away. But none of it was really produced here. I mean, the pre-production of it, like the stories and the design of it, was done in the United States, but the rest of it was basically done elsewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Rankin Bass was a very, very interesting studio based basically in Manhattan. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but...
Well, what happened was... Arthur Rankin Jr., who started the company known as Videocraft International originally, it later became Rankin Bass Productions, but it was known as Videocraft International. What happened was he was the art director on ABC television in the early days of television. So he worked on all the live television shows like Tales of Tomorrow with a lot of famous actors and actresses in those series. And he decided at some point that he was going to start his own studio, not necessarily animation, but his own production company where they would do commercials. Some of them were live action, and some of them later became animated commercials.
Right.
And what happened was there was a delegation from Washington that was led to Arthur Rankin and he went over to Japan to see what kind of animation they were actually doing. And when he saw the stop motion, which became Rankin Bass Animagic for the New Adventures of Pinocchio, he loved it. He loved the art style. He loved the people, the culture, the quality of their work. And the reason he started with the New Adventures of Pinocchio was Walt Disney's Pinocchio was his favorite animated movie.
Oh, wow.
And he loved the art of the movie and just the quality of it. So he started with Pinocchio, and it was relatively a success, but it was a syndicated series broken up into 5 segments so that local television host in Chicago here, it was on WGN TV, I think on Garfield Goose and Friends.
Right.
And they had to finance that with bank loans. And actually, Arthur was halfway through the series and he needed more money. And one of his friends that he was in the military with, or in the Navy, lent him the balance of the money to finish the series.
Oh, wow.
So they didn't really like doing animation through bank loans. And that's also how the Tales of the Wizard of Oz was produced. So along came General Electric. In 1964, they made friendships with people that worked at Montgomery Ward's and NBC and General Electric, and it all kind of came together. And from that point on, they started a company called Tomorrow Entertainment. General Electric did.
Right.
And they financed everything after that.
I see.
So that was a lot better as far as financially, and took the burden off of Arthur Rankin. And by then, Jules Bass had joined as a partner.
They were friends, weren't they? So
yeah, they were friends. Jules Bass worked at an advertising agency. So that's how Arthur Rankin became aware of him, through his television work at ABC. And actually, Jules asked Maury Laws to join in early on, around 63.
Mm-hmm.
Maury Laws had already done some commercial jingles for General Electric, ironically, too. So I think they met through those channels, and he said, we're working on a television special about the Wizard of Oz, and we need a musical supervisor. At the time, they were working with another outfit called Pharrell Thomas and Pollock,
mm-hmm.
who did the songs not only for the Return to Oz, but also for Willie McBean and his Magic Machine.
Oh, yeah.
And at that time, they didn't need Maury Laws to write anything. They just needed him to orchestrate. But eventually, he became the writer of all the music for the Rankin Bass specials.
Maury Laws, you see his name on just about every special. He's listed on Rudolph too, right?
Right.
Yeah, but not as prominent. Yeah.
Well, he took those songs, the great songs by Johnny Marks, but he gave them an extra life with his bouncy, fun, glockenspiel, accented music.
Right.
When you hear it, it's just immediately you fall into a Christmas feeling, and he said he got that from those earlier GE commercials he did, where he was sort of emulating the Nutcracker.
Right.
But he wasn't copying the Nutcracker. He just took some of the ways that they orchestrated the music and put it together. It wasn't really like he was lifting anything.
No, he was using it for a light. I guess it was a light feel to the music, and to give it that Christmas quality to it.
Right.
Because I guess with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, I mean, now the songs are, I mean, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, people knew, but the rest of the songs on that special were just introduced all at once for that special.
Right.
And so they instantly had to be recognizable as Christmas songs.
Right.
So, with a song like Holly Jolly Christmas, but Silver and Gold, I mean, it's Silver and Gold, not to my mind, if I had first seen that, I wouldn't think that would be a Christmas song,
Right.
But,
right.
Yeah, but it, but somehow he was able to get that into the music right away. So it was almost like instant Christmas classic material.
With Rudolph, everything just seemed to work. It's not like you can't make things happen the way that they did. It was an organic blending of talent that just all came together. And what's interesting, I talk to Bill Giles every so often, and he was the sound engineer for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
And that was done in Canada. The soundtrack was done in Canada, correct? Right?
Yeah, at the RCA Victor recording studios. And when Janice Orenstein came in to do Clarice's song, "There's Always Tomorrow," she was just a little girl, and she came in with her mother after school to do that track, and she nailed it on the first take.
Wow.
He had her do a second take, but he used the first take in the special. I mean, that's amazing.
It is amazing. I think sometimes those second and third tracks that they do are just basically backups in case there's a problem with the recording.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Right.
But there's so many things that are unexplainable from Rudolph. And what's interesting, too, is the fact that the only character that really existed prior to the special was Rudolph.
Right. That was all created by Romeo Muller, right?
Right. They were all created by Romeo Muller and designed by Tony Peters, another great guy that I became good friends with. So, I mean, you got to give a lot of credit, especially to Romeo, for creating Yukon Cornelius and Hermie the Elf and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of merchandise around on all these characters, and it isn't being done legally.
Right.
There's still, I think the estates are owed some big money on that stuff.
Right.
But that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. Let's get a little bit away from Rudolph. Rudolph was a massive success.
Right.
That thing came out. It was number one in the ratings the first year, and that basically put those guys on the map. That really said that Rankin Bass was legit, correct?
Right. And what happened almost immediately was they signed a 3-picture deal with Joseph E. Levine the next year. They had already had a feature film in production, Willie McBean and His Magic Machine.
Yes.
They shot that simultaneously with Rudolph, so it has the same actors, the same designer, Tony Peters,
right,
who they hired back. He actually left, and they hired him back for Rudolph and that film. And again, I mentioned Pharrell Thomas and Pollock were in charge of the music, which wasn't the best that they ever came up with songs, but it was good.
Right.
And they were looking to get into feature films. So when Levine signed this deal, that gave them the opportunity to move in the direction of feature films. And they did The Wacky World of Mother Goose, which is a cell animated film, The Daydreamer, which was a very advantageous production with lots of stars, and not only animation, but live action, which they wanted to do.
Right.
And then Mad Monster Party was part of that deal too.
Yes.
And it turns out, in retrospect, Mad Monster Party was the biggest success out of the three, but it got handled sort of poorly in the initial release, which is why it's built up this cult status over the years.
Yeah, I remember seeing it at a matinee in Brooklyn, and loving it. And then I think maybe not the next year, but the year after, it made its way to TV, and and basically it was kind of the Halloween movie, for kids. It was like every year it was on, but really great stuff. And what started the Paul Frees seemed to be their good luck charm, because he basically, he wasn't in Rudolph, but he was basically in everything else they did after that. And I think with Mad Monster Party,
we needed for Mad Monster Party, and I knew Alan Swift. He was a sweet guy. He actually was in a off-Broadway play for Rankin Bass called A Month of Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
He was the only really name actor that was in the cast, and it only lasted like a dozen performances or something like that. But he remembered that production and he enjoyed it.
Right.
And he did a lot of work for Rankin Bass over the years. In fact, he was the Santa Claus voice in 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. The funny looking Santa, gnome, elf looking character that everyone talks about.
Right.
But
they really made him look elf-like.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Alan Swift, he was a master at impersonating other actors.
Mm-hmm.
He was also part of the Howdy Doody cast, and he did Simon Bar Sinister and the Underdog Show.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. Okay, now I'm messing up now. He was also Alan Swift was also Terry Toons used him a lot.
Right.
He was Deputy Dog, right?
Well, Deputy Dog, that was what's his name out of the Howdy Doody cast?
Dayton Allen.
Dayton Allen,
yeah,
who was the brother of my good friend who passed away a few years ago, Bradley Bolke. And Bradley did Chumley in Tennessee Tuxedo, and then he worked with Rankin Bass. These
were all New York productions, which is
right.
Yeah, all the ones we're talking about, because those actors would be used because they were here.
Right. I think the New York actors like Alan Swift were hired by Jules Bass because he was more into the Broadway scene, and he also looked for the East Coast talent. I think Arthur was more of the West Coast talent, where he would get, Danny Thomas and Danny Kaye,
Mickey Rooney,
people like that, Mickey Rooney. And he even worked with the child actors and actresses. I just interviewed Teddy Eccles for my article on the Little Drummer Boy. And Teddy said that he sat in a studio with Arthur, and they just sat at a microphone, and Arthur read the lines and he acted back to Arthur.
Oh, wow.
So that was interesting.
Wow, that's very interesting. So when they were doing the feature films, they basically got a TV deal too, right? So
yeah, and that's where Paul Frees, to get back to your question, Paul Frees came in around the Little Drummer Boy.
That's right.
With June Foray.
Right.
And then they both worked on Frosty in '69.
Right.
And then he just kept working with Paul Frees because Arthur and Paul were tight.
Yeah.
They became friends. And Arthur said he introduced Paul to one of his wives, too.
Oh, wow.
And Paul Frees said the only producer he would even get on a plane for was Arthur Rankin and Jay Ward. That was it.
Yeah.
Those were the two he liked the best.
He liked the best. And if it wasn't that, he was recording his stuff from his studio up the coast in California. And he was close.
Right.
I think he was in Sausalito, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, well, that says a whole lot. I noticed with a lot of the Rankin Bass specials, they tended to use a lot of MGM talent. Fred Astaire, right. Mickey Rooney, Greer Garson, right?
Right.
For Little Drummer Boy. And who am I missing? Danny Kaye was basically from other studios, but it just seemed like they were gravitating toward that talent. They had their heyday, but now they were using them. And it's funny because when they started doing these specials like Frosty the Snowman with Jimmy Durante was an MGM star, right?
Right.
They were using all these people, and it must have been like a thrill for Arthur Rankin to have these guys come in,
Well, the interesting thing about that talent, and that's a whole nother story too. The reason you mentioned early on that the animation wasn't as fluid and wasn't as polished as some of the bigger studios, but what happened was, in my opinion, that once they developed this animagic style, the stop motion style that they used in most of the famous TV specials,
right.
They became associated with that style.
Yes.
And what they did differently with that style is they brought these personalities that were perfect matches to the animation. These actors weren't only big names like you see today, like they'll put a Brad Pitt and an Angelina Jolie in a movie just to put their name on the marquee. The animation that they used and the voices that they got, like Mickey Rooney and Fred Astaire and Keenan Wynn, they really brought characters to life.
Yes.
And you identify these. Burl Ives as Sam the Snowman. Burl said when he got on airplanes, the stewardesses would recognize him as Sam. They didn't know anything about his movie career.
That's
or
right.
his music or any of that stuff. And he did a lot of different things over the years.
Yeah.
It was just this personality thing that they brought to the characters and the style of animation that really put Rankin Bass on the map.
Yeah, the voice work is so important in Rankin Bass productions. And
right.
And when you think, I think that's why they used Paul Frees a lot, because he could not only bring that voice, but he could also act in that voice, kind of similar to like a Mel Blanc. But I think maybe even, probably, I don't want to say better, but different,
Well, Paul Frees, I'm a big fan of Paul Frees, and he's done a lot of great things. He's looped movies.
Mm-hmm.
He did Boris Badenov. He did, all the things at Disneyland, Disney World.
Oh, he's the ghost host and half the pirates in Pirates of the Caribbean and the parks. Yeah.
But when I think of his, maybe his best performance, mm-hmm. I have to think of the Burgermeister
Burger. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's isn't he the perfect politician? I'm not going to get into politics, but isn't he the perfect politician?
He is.
And voiced perfectly.
Yes.
And just, he's even kind of, he's not all bad. He's goofy a little bit, but he's just endearing and one of the best Rankin Bass characters, in my opinion. So,
well, when you get a good villain,
right.
When you really have that personality worked out of the villain, then, you like the villain. I think you got to like the villain. It's like with Peter Pan, you have Captain Hook. You have to like the character somewhat,
Mm-hmm.
and it's, and with the Rankin Bass, specials, I'm thinking about some of the villains in these shows, and are they real villains? I mean, you have Iron Tail in which is Vincent Price. I think it's his first animated role, right?
Right.
So you have to like the characters. You have to like the villains. Even with the Abominable Snowman.
Well, Tim Burton really, really liked Evil Iron Tail because I think he based everything in his career off of that character.
Yeah.
Every single thing he ever did was goth, black gloves, black outfit,
metallic hands, or he has metallic tail, but
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And that had a big influence on Tim Burton's work.
Yeah.
And I got to meet Vincent Price's daughter not too long ago, and I gave her an autographed card of Iron Tail. Paul Coker Jr. signed that. He designed all the characters for that.
What was the? We're going to talk some more about the specials, but Rankin Bass basically settled on a team early on, right? So you have okay. So we know Maury Laws, who is really a brilliant composer. I actually, I think I talked to you a while ago. It was a long time ago. I talked to you, and I think we were talking about Maury Laws, and I said, and I thought the guy was long gone. You said, no, he's still around. He's still around.
I became, out of all the Rankin Bass people, I became closest friends with Maury and Paul Coker Jr. and Arthur.
Right.
And Maury has a young son.
Mm-hmm.
He must be around 30 now.
Oh, wow.
And he's an accountant in Chicago.
Okay.
And so he would visit his son in Chicago, and whenever he would be downtown, I would go and meet him for dinner and lunch and things like that.
Oh, wow. Cool.
So Maury was he was a very guarded person.
Yeah.
He was always like very protective of his privacy and his music and everything else. But later on, there were a couple of big productions that they wanted to use his music for that producers came to my house to discuss. That we never really ever got launched. But Maury wrote music for the Baseball Hall of Fame, and also for Lambeau Field, because he was a season ticket holder of the Green Bay Packers. He wrote some music for them.
Right.
And I think they should have had a big, and this is what we were discussing, a big Rankin Bass musical that traveled around the country at Christmas time.
Oh, that would have been, that's actually a great idea. Incorporate all the songs and create a new story.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Oh, that's a great idea. I'm surprised they haven't done it yet. I'm sure it's coming.
Yeah, hopefully.
I'm sure it's coming, but it's sad in a way, because Maury passed away, I think it was about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. Am I right?
Yeah.
I wrote him an email, and I said, the music that you've done over the years has been so magical and memorable and wonderful. And I said, I put it right up there with the best stuff from Broadway. It really was a great music. And
well, the Heat Miser and Snow Miser themes alone are masterpieces. And then you have things like One Star in the Night in The Little Drummer Boy. I thought that was something out of the turn of the century or something, like a classic choir type song. No, they wrote it, and they wrote all those great songs in 'Twas the Night Before Christmas.
Oh yeah,
Santa Claus is Coming to Town. I mean, look at that soundtrack.
Yeah. But I think his
in front of the other.
Oh, absolutely. All that stuff, really wonderful and memorable, instantly memorable. I think his best score though is for Here Comes Peter Cottontail with Danny Kaye. I told him so. There's a song in there.
The Puzzle of Life.
Yeah. That's it.
That's a beautiful song.
It's a really beautiful song, and. All this stuff is on YouTube. I think you can just find these songs on there.
He said he modeled that song after Frank Sinatra's style.
Really? Wow.
You don't really hear it, but it starts with that horn, and it's a very well-written song. And then the song "If I Could Only Get Back to Yesterday."
If I can only get, I guess we'd have to pay royalties if I go any further.
He said that was more country, and that has some banjo in it and everything.
Yeah, but it's a wonderful diversion,
right?
In the special, from the usual stuff. And I would say that special more than any other, the music really goes a little bit off like what they were doing for the other specials.
Right.
The music was a little bit more playful and
interesting too.
Yeah. No, he was amazing. I mean, and I guess Jules, he found him, right? So,
right.
Jules ended up writing lyrics for these songs, correct?
Right, because the songs had to move the plot along, and Jules was sort of a master at that, at sticking a song in, not just to, all of a sudden they're singing. It's to move the plot along.
Right.
And he really was a master at keeping the story going.
Keeping the story going, but keeping it entertaining.
Right.
In the music and the visuals and...
See, Jules wanted to be in Broadway. Arthur wanted to be in feature films.
Right.
And Jules was very disappointed when A Month of Sundays didn't take off. They were going to do another Broadway version of Huck, which was in the planning stages. Jack Davis even did a poster for it that I put in my 20th anniversary book, and Romeo Muller wrote a script for it.
Right.
So Jules was very disappointed that they weren't able to get into Broadway, and Maury said that Jules was never the same after that.
Oh, it's too bad.
And Arthur, his goal was to make feature films, and they started to get into that with King Kong Escapes.
Right.
And then, they had a very successful film called The Last Unicorn.
Yes, I saw it. I saw it in the theater.
They're actually going to do some kind of a Academy screening of that next month. And I was contacted by Peter S. Beagle's people.
Right.
He wrote the book, and they're going to try to get some of the actors there. And the only one I could think of that's still around is Jeff Bridges and Mia Farrow, I guess.
Right.
I don't know if they're going to be there or not, but that film was very well received. And, they didn't make a whole lot of theatrical feature films. A lot of them ended up on television, the ABC Friday night movie, like The Last Dinosaur,
right,
and the Bermuda Depths and things.
They did a film which was the Daydreamer, just going back into the 60s, and that was the one that they probably rivaling Disney in a way, with all but really big names. And it had very good songs in it. I think Maury wrote the songs for that, or did they actually?
Yeah, that was actually one of the finest soundtracks that they ever wrote together, Jules Bass and Maury Laws. And in fact, the movie just came out on Blu-ray. It came out last year,
right?
From Kino Lorber, and I did the commentary with Lee Gambin. And there's so much to talk about with that movie. I wrote a book, The Making of Santa Claus is Coming to Town and The Daydreamer, because I wanted to pair up a really famous Rankin Bass production with one that most people are still learning about.
That's right. I don't know if I saw that in the theater, or I think I saw it in the theater in Brooklyn, because it came out like in the late 60s. And and it has Animagic in it. It has the stop motion animation in it, and spots. So so that's what I mean. It's kind of like, big name stars, and then it has animation in it, and it's like it's their big movie. And I think this is alluded to in Enchanted World of Rankin Bass, where there were some scenes that were shot after the New York World's Fair had finished.
Exactly.
And they were using some of the streets there, I guess, in was it Belgium?
Yeah, the Belgian village.
Yes.
And they left that up for a long, long time, because a friend of mine went there when they took it down, and he brought me a brick from that set.
Oh, wow.
Right out of the Daydreamer.
Really, really neat.
What's interesting about the movie too is that they wanted it to be sort of a rival to Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins was a huge success a few years before, but Levine was disappointed with the outcome. Even though the movie, I think it's really good on a lot of levels, it just doesn't move throughout like you would want it to, so that it becomes sort of a 4-star movie.
Right.
There's some really kind of depressing parts about it.
Oh, the Little Mermaid sequence is depressing.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So Levine was very disappointed. And that's the funny thing is the Mad Monster Party release was scheduled next. So he didn't get fully behind it. And he wasn't happy with the relationship with Rankin Bass. So that movie, had it been the first one they put out, I think it would have been a huge success.
Right.
But being the third movie, it was just kind of snuck out, as Maury Laws always used to say.
Yeah.
And
that that happens, because they lose faith. The marketing is really important to any one of those movies. And so if you don't put the marketing behind it, basically it gets pushed. I'm pretty sure Mad Monster Party was matinees,
Right. Saturday matinees.
And basically you're getting child admissions. So, and I'll tell you, my parents weren't in there watching the movie. It was me and my sister, my oldest sister, watching Mad Monster Party. So, she was still under that point where it was child admission, So yeah. So you're not gonna reap the rewards. You need the adults to get in there to get the full bounty.
Here's kind of the funny thing when I look at my history with Rankin Bass and the books that I've written and the specials in the films, and you always have to ask yourself, why is this important? Why is it important to people? Why have these things lasted so long? And even with them, the fact that those 3 films weren't huge successes, when you look back at the Rankin Bass catalog, most of their stuff was good.
Yeah.
Most of it. I would say like 95% of the time, even if it wasn't financially a success, it was still good. Whereas today in modern entertainment, you're lucky if you can get anything close to what Rankin Bass did. let alone last more than a year.
Well, I think the key with Rankin Bass, and I didn't mean to be insulting before about the animation quality. They were working with a lot less money than a Disney, or
exactly. Jules Bass told me that Josephine Levine, wanted a Star Wars on the budget of Thunderbirds.
Of course.
Yeah. So I think that's very telling. But when you can take a small budget and make the quality stuff that Rankin Bass did,
right,
it's pretty incredible.
What I was amazed by, and it wasn't until I think I saw this years later after it came out, it was Frosty Snowman. Disney actually put out, Disneyland Records put out the soundtracks.
For Frosty's Winter Wonderland.
Yes, and but I was looking at 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, which if you haven't seen it, you should see it. It has a weird Santa Claus, but it's still heartwarming. It's still a good script and good music in it. Really good music. I'm talking to my audience now, but the point is that they had a record cover from there, and basically, if you look at the artwork, it's hand inked lines. I mean, They could have just Xeroxed the drawings onto acetate, but they did self color lines on the artwork, and so I think they're with Rankin Bass, you had, yes, they produced these things overseas, mainly because they could produce them cheaper. But the key was that they were still trying to get the quality out of it. And so, to have self-ink lines, to have colored lines, outlines for the characters and stuff like that, they had really beautiful backgrounds. The tracks were impeccably produced, really well produced. The soundtrack, the music, the designs. The designs were really well done. It wasn't slapdash, They tried to push the quality out of everything they did, even though. Well,
here's something that I didn't mention before, and we also should talk about the small staff that they assembled in New York.
Right, I was getting to that before. Yeah.
But here's something that I didn't tell you that maybe a lot of your listeners don't know about. And it's very well illustrated in my book, the Arthur Rankin Scrapbook, Birth of Animagic. Mm-hmm. Arthur Rankin, he didn't just dole out the animation to Japan and leave it at that. He actually went to Japan and worked with the people that were doing the animation.
That's right.
I didn't mention that.
No.
And Arthur, before he died, he went back to Japan when they had the tsunami, and he reunited with all the animators that they could get back together. Oh, wow. And he said it was like a love fest. They loved him so much, and he loved them. So when he would hire these different studios, the Pinocchio was Dentsu. Mm-hmm. And he kept a scrapbook on that, and that's what I made into the book. Right. His scrapbook. He really loved the animators, the culture there, and he spent a lot of his life there living with them.
Right.
And if he was going to hire, they hired Mushi Studios for Frosty the Snowman, and I think they also did 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, mm-hmm. and the Reluctant Dragon and Mr. Toad Show and so forth.
Right.
He would oversee the production and make sure that they were getting the animation to look as closely to the Paul Coker Jr. drawings that they could get.
Right.
That was important to Arthur because, as I mentioned before, he was an art director at ABC. So being an artist, you have that sense, you have that eye for the animation, and you don't want it to look cheap mm-hmm. and off. and bad. Like some cell animation, you'll see things where they're missing arms and the color's wrong, and
right,
like in Filmation with the Batman, his emblem will be missing, or
right.
Robin's R will be backwards and things like that. Well, I think Arthur kind of oversaw these productions in such a way that he knew what it took, and he made sure that they hit the mark, at least on the budgets that they had.
Do you have any questions or comments about the podcast? Please email Brian at cartoonerific.com. Your email may be featured in one of our future shows.
Hey, welcome back. Thank you, Rick, for a wonderful interview. We're going to have Rick back next week for part 2, so stay tuned for that. We'll be talking about the magic of Rankin Bass, and that should be fun. So, like I said, please come back and listen to that one. If you really like what you're listening to, please subscribe. We're available on a multitude of different services, so pick your favorite one and subscribe there. And this way, when a new Cartoonerific classic animated cartoon podcast with your host, Brian Mitchell, is uploaded, you will be informed, and that's a very good thing. If you really like what you're listening to, please tell a friend. Want to spread the fun around. The only way we're going to be able to do that is if people tell other people. I mean, there's other ways, but hey, it's probably the best way. I just want everybody to have a great day. You have an excellent week, and thank you again for tuning in.
This has been a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
The Cartoonerific podcast is copyright 2024 by Cartoonerific Studios Incorporated. All rights reserved.